Well, hello there, and welcome to the Cory Doctorow podcast. I'm Cory Doctorow, and boy, am I tired. I just got back yesterday from a really fantastic trip to Milan, where I was the guest of honor at a regular event there called Meet the Media Guru, where I gave a talk at the Mediateca, a large digital library, and was interviewed by lots of local bloggers and journalists, and met lots of interesting people, including the new editor in chief of Wired Italia, a new magazine. And generally just had a really good time. Alice and the baby came out, and so we had a weekend there as well after the talk and really enjoyed ourselves. But it did mean that we got home late last night, and the baby didn't sleep very well. And Alice had to be at work early this morning, so I had to get up to make breakfast an hour earlier. And it was all very exhausting. I've just had a nap, so if I sound a little muzzy, that's why. But Milan was terrific, and thanks to everyone who came. It was more than a full house. The Mediateca room was completely full. They were standing in all the stairways and in the back, and then the overflow room in the bar was apparently completely full as well, and they were standing outside the bar watching the video there. So, boy, it was pretty gratifying. Those of you who tune into the podcast, which would be all of you listening to this, I suppose, heard the first installment of the Down and Out of the Magic Kingdom podcast last week. That comes to us from podiobooks.com and Evo Terra and his gang, who recorded a free Creative Commons licensed audio adaptation of Down and Out of the Magic Kingdom. It's the third audio adaptation of Down and Out of the Magic Kingdom from fans. So I really like it. I think it's a great reading, and it's there and free. If you go to craphound.com and look on the podcast feed, you'll find a link to see the whole thing. I'm quite excited because Alice is leaving for Texas this week to go to South by Southwest, and she's leaving me and the baby alone. And it's the first time I'll have had the baby alone for more than a night or so. I go away rather a lot, unfortunately, and leave Alice for a couple of nights at a time. But I'm gonna have the baby for almost a week on all on my own, and I'm really looking forward to a little daddy-daughter time for a week. Should be great. HarperCollins, I don't remember if I mentioned this last week, but HarperCollins has bought the rights to Makers in the UK. This is my next novel, a novel for grown-ups coming out in October from Tor and also from HarperCollins here in the UK. Um, it's a novel that was originally syndicated in part as Theme Punks on Salon. It's a book about economic collapse, creativity, ingenuity, hacking, and radical weight loss strategies, of all things. And HarperCollins bought the rights to that and to all my other novels, so they'll all be coming out here in the UK over the next year or two. And my foreign rights agent, Denny Bauer, had other good news, which is that Little Brother has now been published or purchased in 10 languages. So wherever you are, there's a pretty good chance that Little Brother will be coming out near you soon. In other novel writing news, For the Win, the novel I'm working on now, I hit 50,000 words on it today, so I'm pretty happy with that milestone. Actually, it's been a very productive week, despite the trip to Milan. I On Friday, I managed to write my locus column, a column for the Harvard Business Review, my speech for Milan, my upcoming speech for the Between conference, or no, not Between, Deconstruct conference in Berlin, speech for the London Book Fair, all on the plane and on the way. So very productive. And continuing that productive vein, today has been very good because today is the day that I cleaned out the London storage locker. The last couple of pieces that were in it, I had been paying a ridiculous amount of money, as it turned out, for almost a year now for a locker that was basically empty. All that was in it was a painting that we actually really wanted to hang up in the flat, but we don't have a car, and you have to hire a car to come and move it. It was too big to fit in a regular car, and so on. And just between the baby and everything else, never got around to it. So finally today, I got this giant load off my back, and boy, does it feel fantastic. So I now am the proud owner of one fewer storage locker, and I have a lovely painting hanging up in the bedroom. So anyway, that's all the news that's fit to print. When next I speak to you, I will be a single parent at least for a couple of days, and I'll let you know how that's working out. And without further ado, then, let me read to you a little bit more of Someone Comes to Town, Someone Leaves Town, my 2005 novel. Kurt was properly appreciative of Alan's bookcases and trophies, ran his fingertips over the wood, willingly accepted some iced mint tea sweetened with honey, and used a coaster without having to be asked. A washing machine and a mountain, he said. Yes, Alan said. He kept a roof over our head and she kept our clothes clean. You've told that joke before, right? Kurt's foot was bouncing, which made the chains on his pants and jacket jangle. And now Davy's after us, Alan said. I don't know why it's now. I don't know why Davy does anything, but he always hated me most of all. So why did he snatch your brothers first? I think he wanted me to sweat. He wants me scared all the time. I'm the eldest. I'm the one who left the mountain. I'm the one who came first and made all the connections with the outside world. They all looked to me to explain the world, but I never had any explanations that would suit Davy. This is pretty weird, Kurt said. Alan cocked his head at Kurt. He was about 30, old for a punk, and he had a kind of greasy sheen about him, like he didn't remember to wash often enough, despite his protestations about his cleanliness. But at 30, he should have seen enough to know that the world was both weirder than he suspected, and not so weird as certain mystically inclined people would like to believe. Arnold didn't like this moment of disclosure, didn't like dropping his carefully cultivated habit of hiding this, but he also couldn't help but feel relieved. A part of his mind nagged him, though, and told him that too much of this would waken the worry for his brothers from its narcotized slumber. I've told other people, just a few. They didn't believe me. You don't have to either. Why don't you think about it for a while? What are you going to do? I'm going to try to figure out how to find my brothers. I can't go underground like Davy can. I don't think I can anyway. I never have, but Davy's so broken, so small and twisted. He's not smart, but he's cunning, and he's determined. I'm smarter than he is, so I'll try to find the smart way. I'll think about it too. Well, I've got to get ready to go diving, Kurt said. He stood up with a jangle. Thanks for the iced tea, Adam. It was nice to meet you, Kurt, Alan said, and shook his hand. Alan woke with something soft over his face. It was pitch dark, and he couldn't breathe. He tried to reach up, but his arms wouldn't move. He couldn't sit up. Something heavy was sitting on his chest. The soft thing, a pillow, ground against his face, cruelly pressing down on the cartilage in his nose, filling his mouth as he gasped for air. He shuddered hard and felt something give near his right wrist, and then his arm was loose from the elbow down. He kept working the arm, his chest afire, and then he'd freed it to the shoulder, and something bit him, hard little teeth like knives in the fleshy underside of his bicep. Flailing dug the teeth in harder, and he knew he was bleeding, could feel it seeping down his arm. Finally, he got his hand onto something, a mummified, desiccated piece of flesh. Davy's ribs, like dry stones, cold and thin. He felt up higher, felt for the place where Davy's arm met his shoulder, and then twisted as hard as he could, until the arm popped free in its socket. He shook his head violently, and the pillow slid away. The room was still dark, and the hot, moist air rushed into his nostrils and his mouth as he gasped it in. He heard Davy moving in the dark, and as his eyes adjusted, he saw him unfolding a knife. It was a clasp knife with a broken hasp, and it swung open with the sound of a cockroach's shell crunching underfoot. The blade was rusty. Alan flung his freed arm across his body and tried to tug himself loose, but he was being held down by his own sheets, which had been tacked or stapled to the bed frame. Using all his strength, he rolled over, heaving and bucking, and he felt and heard the staples popping free down one side of the bed, just as Davy slashed at where his face had been a moment before. The knife whistled past his ear, then scored deeply along his shoulder. His arm flopped uselessly at his side, and now they were both fighting one-armed, though Davy had a knife and Adam was wrapped in a sheet. His bedroom was singularly lacking in anything that could be improvised into a weapon. He considered trying to get a heavy encyclopedia out to use as a shield, but it was too far a distance and too long a shot. He scooted back on the bed, trying to untangle the sheet which was still secured at the foot of the bed and all along one side. He freed his good arm just as Davy slashed at him again, aiming for the meat of his thigh, the big arteries there that could bleed you out in a minute or two. He grabbed for Davy's shoulder and caught it for an instant, squeezed and twisted, but then the skin he had hold of sloughed away, and Davy was free, dancing back. Then he heard, from downstairs, the sound of rhythmic pounding at the door. He'd been hearing it for some time, but he hadn't registered it until now. A muffled yell from below. Police? Mimi? He screamed out, "Help!" hoping his voice would carry through the door. Apparently it did. He heard the sound of the small glass pane over the doorknob shatter, and Davy turned his head to look in the direction of the sound. Alan snatched up the pillow that he'd been smothering under and swung it as hard as he could at Davy's head, knocking him around, and the door was open now, the summer night air sweeping up the stairs to the second-floor bedroom. Alan? It was Kurt. Kurt, up here, he's got a knife. Boots on the stairs, and Davy standing again, cornered, with the knife, slashing at the air toward him and toward the bedroom door, toward the light coming up the stairs, bobbing, Kurt's mag light clenched in his teeth, and Davy bolted for the door with the knife held high. The light stopped moving, and there was an instant's tableau. Davy caught in the light, cracked black lips peeled back from sharp teeth, chest heaving, knife bobbing, and then Alan was free, diving for his knees, bringing him down. Kurt was on them before Davy could struggle up to his good elbow, kicking the knife away, scattering finger bones like dice. Davy screeched like a rusty hinge as Kurt twisted his arms up behind his back and Alan took hold of his ankles. He thrashed like a raccoon in a trap, and Alan forced the back of his head down so that his face was mashed against the cool floor, muffling his cries. Kurt shifted so that his knee and one hand were pinning Davy's wrists, fished in his pockets, and came out with a bundle of hairy twine. He set it on the floor next to Alan and then shifted his grip back to Davy's arms. As soon as Alan released the back of Davy's head, he jerked it up and snapped his teeth into the top of Kurt's calf, just above the top of his high, chain-draped boot. Kurt hollered, and Adam reached out and took the knife, moving quickly before he could think, and smashed the butt into Davy's jaw, which cracked audibly. Davy let go of Kurt's calf, and Alan worked quickly to lash his feet together, using half the bundle of twine, heedless of how he cut into the thin, cracking skin. He used the knife to snip the string and then handed the roll to Kurt, who went to work on Danny's wrists. Alan got the lights and rolled his brother over, looking into his mad eyes. Dale was trying to scream, but with his jaw hanging limp and his teeth scattered, it came out in a rasp. Alan stood and found that he was naked, his shoulder and bicep dripping blood down his side into a pool on the polished floor. "We'll take him to the basement," he told Kurt, and dug through the laundry hamper at the foot of the bed for jeans. He found a couple of pairs of boxer shorts and tied one around his bicep and the other around his shoulder, using his teeth and chin as a second hand. It took 2 tries before he had them both bound tight enough to still the throbbing. The bedroom looked like someone had butchered an animal in it, and the floor was gritty with Daryl's leavings, teeth and nails and finger bones. Picking his way carefully through the mess, he hauled the sheet off the bed, popping out the remaining staples, which pinged off the bookcases and danced on the polished wood of the floor. He folded it double and laid it on the floor next to Davy. "Help me roll him into it," he said, and then he saw that Kurt was staring down at his shriveled, squirming, hateful brother in horror, wiping his hands over and over on the thighs of his jeans. He looked up and his eyes were glazed and wide. "I was passing by and I saw the shadows in the window. I thought you were being attacked." He hugged himself. "I was," Alan said. He dug another t-shirt out of his hamper. "Here, wrap this around your hands." They rolled Davy into the sheet and then wrapped him in it. He was surprisingly heavy, dense, hefting his end of the sheet one-handed, hefting that mysterious weight. He remembered picking up Ed, Fred, Jeff, that first day in the cave, remembered the weight of the brother in the brother in the brother, and he had a sudden sickening sense that perhaps Davy was so heavy because he'd eaten them. Once they had him bound snugly in the sheet, Danny stopped thrashing and became very still. They carried him carefully down the dark stairs, the walnut shell grit echoing the feel of teeth and flakes of skin on the bare soles of Alan's feet. They dumped him unceremoniously on the cool mosaic of tile on the floor. They stared at the unmoving bundle for a moment. "Wait here, I'm going to get a chair," Alan said. "Jesus, don't leave me here alone," Kurt said. "That kid, the one who saw him take your brother? No one's seen him since." He looked down at Davy with wide, crazed eyes. Alan's shoulder throbbed. "All right," he said. "You get a chair from the kitchen, the captain's chair in the corner with the newspaper recycling stacked on it." While Kurt was upstairs, Alan unwrapped his brother. Danny's eyes were closed, his jaw hanging askew, his wrists bound behind him. Alan leaned carefully over him and took his jaw and rotated it gently until it popped back into place. "Davy," he said. The eyes were closed, but now there was an attentiveness, an alertness to him. Alan stepped back quickly, feeling foolish at his fear of this pathetic, disjointed, bound thing on the floor. No two ways about it, though. Davy gave him the absolute willies, making his testicles draw up and the hair on the back of his arms prickle. "Set the chair down there," Alan said, pointing. He hoisted Davy up by his dry, papery armpits and sat him in the seat. He took some duct tape out of a utility drawer under the basement staircase and used it to gum Davy down in the chair. "Davy," he said again, "I know you can hear me. Stop pretending." "That's your brother?" Kurt said. "The one who—" "That's him," Alan said. "I guess you believe me now, huh?" Davy grinned suddenly, mirthless. "Still making friends and influencing people, brother?" he said. His voice was wet and hiccuping, like he was drowning in snot. "We're not going to play any games here, Davy. You're going to tell me where Edward, Felix, and Griffin are, or I'm going to tear your fingers off and smash them into powder. When I run out of fingers, I'll switch to teeth." Kurt looked at him in alarm. He moaned, "Jesus, Adam." Adam whirled on him, something snapping inside. "Don't, Kurt, just don't, okay? He tried to kill me tonight. He may already have killed my brothers. This is life or death, and there's no room for sentiment or humanity here. Get a hammer out of the toolbox on that shelf." Kurt hesitated. "Do it," Alan said, pointing at the toolbox. Kurt shrank back, looking as though he'd been slapped. He moved as if in a dream, opening the toolbox and pawing through it until he came up with a scarred hammer, one claw snapped off. Davy shook his head. "You don't scare me, Albert. Not for an instant. I have a large supply of fingers and teeth. All I need, and you're just like him. You're a sentimentalist, scared of yourself, scared of me, scared of everything. That's why you ran away. That's why you got rid of me. Scared." Alan dug in his pocket for the finger bones and teeth he'd collected. He found the tip of a pinky with a curled-over nail as thick as an oyster shell, crusted with dirt and blood. "Give me the hammer, Kurt," he said. Davy's eyes followed him as he set the fingertip down on the tiles and raised the hammer. He brought it down just to a little of one side of the finger, hard enough to break the tile. Kurt jumped a little, and Alan held the hammer up again. "Tell me, or this time I won't miss," he said, looking Davy in the eye. Davy shrugged in his bonds. Alan swung the hammer again. It hit the fingertip with a jarring impact that vibrated up his arm and resonated through his hurt shoulder. He raised the hammer again. He'd expected the finger to crush into powder, but instead it fissured into 3 jagged pieces, like a piece of chert fracturing under a hammerstone. Davy's eyes were squeezed down to slits now. "You're the scared one. You can't scare me," he said, his voice choked with phlegm. Alan sat on the irregular tile and propped his chin on his palm. "Okay, Davy, maybe you're right. I'm scared. You've kidnapped our brothers, maybe even killed them. You're terrorizing me. I can't think. I can't sleep. So tell me, Danny, why shouldn't I just kill you again and get rid of all that fear?" "I know where the brothers are," he said instantly. "I know where there are more people like us. All the answers, Albert. Every answer you've ever looked for. I've got them, and I won't tell you any of them. But so long as I'm walking around and talking, you think that I might." Alan took Marcy back to his bedroom, the winter bedroom that was no more than a niche in the hot spring cavern, a pile of rags and a sleeping bag for a bed. It had always been enough for him, but now he was ashamed of it. He took the flashlight from Marcy and let it wind down so that they were sitting in the darkness. "Your parents?" she said, then broke off. "It's complicated." "Are they dead?" He reached out in the dark and took her hand. "I don't know how to explain it," he said. "I can lie, and you'll probably think I'm telling the truth, or I can tell the truth, and you'll think that I'm lying." She squeezed his hand. Despite the sweaty heat of the cave, her fingers were cold as ice. He covered her hand with his free hand and rubbed at her cold fingers. "Tell me the truth," she whispered. "I'll believe you." So he did, in mutters and whispers. He didn't have the words to explain it all, didn't know exactly how to explain it, but he tried. How he knew his father's moods, how he felt his mother's love. After keeping this secret all his life, it felt incredible to be letting it out. His heart thudded in his chest, and his shoulders felt progressively lighter until he thought he might rise up off his bedding and fly around the cave. If it hadn't been dark, he wouldn't have been able to tell it. It was the dark, and the faint, lunar glow of Marcy's face that showed no expression, that let him open up and spill out all the secrets. Her fingers squeezed tighter and tighter, and now he felt like singing and dancing, because surely between the two of them they could find a book in the library, or maybe an article in the microfilm cabinets that would really explain it to him. He wound down. "No one else knows about this," he said. "No one except you." He leaned in and planted a kiss on her cold lips. She sat rigid and unmoving as he kissed her. "Marcy?" "Alan," she breathed. Her fingers went slack. She pulled her hand free. Suddenly, Alan was cold too. The scant inches between them felt like an unbridgeable gap. "You think I'm lying," he said, staring out into the cave. "I don't know." "It's okay," he said. "I can help you get home now, all right." She folded her hands on her lap and nodded miserably. On the way out of the cave, Eddie Fred Georgie tottered over, still holding his car. He held it out to her mutely. She knelt down solemnly and took it from him, then patted him on the head. "Merry Christmas, kiddo," she said. He hugged her leg, and she laughed a little and bent to pick him up. She couldn't. He was too heavy. She let go of him and, nervously, pried his arms from around her thigh. Alan took her down the path to the side road that led into town. The moonlight shone on the white snow, making the world glow bluish. They stood by the roadside for a long and awkward moment. "Good night, Alan," she said, and turned and started trudging home. There was no torture at school the next day. She ignored him through the morning, and he couldn't find her at recess, but at lunch she came and sat next to him. They ate in silence, but he felt comforted by her presence beside him, a warmth that he sensed more than felt. She sat beside him in afternoon classes, too. Not a word passed between them. For Alan, it felt like anything they could say to one another would be less true than the silence, but that realization hurt. He'd never been able to discuss his life and nature with anyone, and it seemed as though now he never would. But the next morning, in the schoolyard, she snagged him as he walked past the climber made from a jumble of bolted-together logs and dragged him into the middle. It smelled faintly of pee and was a rich source of mysterious roaches and empty beer bottles on Monday mornings after the teenagers had come and gone. She was crouched down on her haunches in the snow there, her steaming breath coming out in short huffs. She grabbed him by the back of his knit toque and pulled his face to hers, kissing him hard on his mouth, shocking the hell out of him by forcing her tongue past his lips. They kissed until the bell rang, and as Alan made his way to class, he felt like his face was glowing like a light bulb. His homeroom teacher asked him if he was feeling well, and he stammered out some kind of affirmative, while Marcy, sitting in the next row, stifled a giggle. They ate their lunches together, and she filled the silence with a running commentary of the deficiencies of the sandwich her father had packed her, the strange odors coming from the brown bag that Alan had brought, filled with winter mushrooms and some soggy bread and cheese, and the hairiness of the mole on the lunch lady's chin. But when they reached the schoolyard, she tried to drag him back to the logs, and he resisted, instead taking her to the marsh where he'd first spied her. The ground had frozen over, and the rushes and reeds were stubble, poking out of the snow. He took her mittened hands in his, and waited for her to stop squirming. Which she did, eventually. He'd rehearsed what he'd say to her all morning. "Do you believe me? What am I? Am I like you? Do you still love me? Are you still my friend? I don't understand it any better than you, but now there are two of us who know about it, and maybe we can make sense of it together. God, it's such a relief not to be the only one anymore." But now, standing there with Marcy, in the distant cat calls of the playground, and the smell of the new snow, and the soughing of the wind in the trees, he couldn't bring himself to say it. She either knew these things or she didn't, and if she didn't, he didn't know what he could do to help it. "What?" she said at last. "Do you—" he began, then fell silent. He couldn't say the words. She looked irritated, and the sounds and the smells swept over him as the moment stretched. But then she softened. "I don't understand it, Alan," she said. "Is it true? Is it really how you say it is? Did I see what I saw?" "It's true," he said, and it was as though the clouds had parted, the world gone bright with the glare off the snow, and the sounds from the playground now joyous instead of cruel. "It's true, and I don't understand it any more than you do, Marcy. Are you human, Alan?" "I think so," he said. "I bleed, I eat, I sleep, I think and talk and dream." She squeezed his hands and darted a kiss at him. "You kiss," she said, and it was all right again. "All right then. When next I speak to you, I'll be a single parent. Talk to you later."